those moments in life where you're going along, everything seems to be fine or just ticking along, and then something happens to challenge you and change the way you're doing everything? That's exactly what takes place in the story that we're going to look at today. Last week we started looking at the life of this guy named Peter. Peter was one of the first followers of Jesus. We know a lot about him because within a collection of books called the Bible, there are 66 different books. And some of the books collected in here are biographies. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all biographies. Now the book of Acts is also a biography. The book of Acts was written by a guy named Luke. Luke was investigative journalist. He was a historian. And the book of Acts is like the sequel to the life of Jesus. It's the what takes place next. What happens next? And so Luke writes about the history of the early church, but it's a biography about the followers and the first leaders of the early church, of which Peter was one of the main leaders. Acts hits the ground running. In the first few verses, here's what's taking place. Jesus is saying to everybody, he's like, you know what? I'm about to leave. I've done my bit. Over to you now. Wait here in Jerusalem, because I promise you, I will be with you, and I'll be with you in a new way that you have not yet experienced. I'm going to be inside you. I'm going to be filling you with the ability and the power, the skills to do everything you need to do, to be my witnesses all around the world. And then, boom, he goes away in a cloud. And of course the disciples and the early followers are all standing there a bit confused because they don't really know what he's talking about. But he leaves. That's how the book of Acts starts. It's over to you guys. Then, crazy stuff happens. In the first 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 chapters of the book of Acts, there is story after story of crazy things going on. There's people that are thrown into prison. There's people that escape from prison and then get thrown back into prison. There's people that get arrested. There's people that get healed. There's people that get delivered. There's thousands of people who come to know Jesus. There's a whole bunch of people who don't know how to speak any other language except the one that they were taught as children, all of a sudden being able to testify and speak of the good things of God in a whole bunch of other languages. I mean, there's some crazy stuff that happens and goes on in the first few chapters of Acts. We even have the first martyr. We have the first structure of how the church figured out how to care for widows and care for people who are hungry. We have the early church trying to figure out, what do we do now? After about 7 years, we get to Acts chapter 10. And this is the bit that we want to look at today. In Acts chapter 10, we have the story of Peter. And it says that he was hungry, and he was upstairs on the roof, and he was waiting for a meal, like an open deck or patio area, and he's waiting while the food is being prepared. And while he's waiting, he has this vision. And the vision that he sees is this blanket or sheet coming down from heaven. And in that blanket, in that sheet, there's loads of animals. And there's animals that are deemed clean and animals that are deemed unclean, the sort of animals that you would never eat in that day culturally. Things that were off limits, taboo. Don't eat one of those, you break the rules. And then this voice speaks to Peter and it says, come on, Peter, get up, kill and eat. Peter's like, no way, dude. I have never in my life eaten anything that's unclean. I'm not going to start now. Then the voice replies, don't you dare call anything unclean that I have made clean. This vision, it happens again in the same way. The voice says, get up, kill and eat. Peter says, I ain't never doing that. I'm not eating anything that is unclean. And then the voice tells him again, don't you dare call anything unclean that I have made clean. It happens 3 times. We kind of get the feeling that with Peter, sometimes he needed to have things repeated to him. It was 3 times that he denied Jesus, and then it was 3 times that Jesus asked Peter if he loved him. It was 3 times that Peter was told by Jesus to feed the sheep, tend the sheep, care for the sheep. And here we have an episode again where Peter is given an instruction, and it happens 3 times. And after the 3rd time, the vision goes away, and then there's a knock at the door. We go downstairs to see who's there, and there are 3 servants who've been sent by a guy named Cornelius, who just happens to be a Roman centurion. And they are inviting Peter to be a guest at his house. I just want to give a little bit of context to what's going on here. Now, remember, the first followers of Jesus were eyewitnesses. They testified to the things that they had seen and they had heard. Now, their belief system wasn't based on a bunch of rules or principles. It wasn't an ideology. It wasn't a worldview. Their belief system wasn't even based in a book. The book of the Bible didn't even exist at this time. Their belief was based on an event. That event was the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. That was the one crazy thing that happened, that they saw happen, that changed their world. And so these first followers of Jesus, that was the story that they told. That was what they testified. That was what they were witnessing to others about. And here you have a situation where Cornelius, a Roman centurion, wants to find out more. And he wants to go to the source. He doesn't want a friend of a friend of a friend who knows somebody, who used to work with somebody, who also lived near someone, who might have seen or might have heard. No, he's going straight to an eyewitness. He's going straight to someone who had seen and someone who had heard with their own eyes and ears what took place. Now, the other bit of context I need to sort of add in is the first followers of Jesus were all Jewish. And there's some pretty clear historical reasons why that took place. One of the biggies is this. The Jewish people were the only ones at that time who had a belief system that there was only one God. All of the other cultures, all of the other religions at that time believed in a multiplicity of gods. That there was lots of gods. There was gods of this and a god of that. And there's a god in the water and there's a god in the tree. There's a god of the sun. There's a god of everything. But the Jewish people believed there was only one God. You see, the Jewish people also had a temple just like the other religions. The Jewish people also did sacrifices like the other religions. What the Jewish people did that was very different was they believed there was only one God. Now, inherent in their belief system was that one day a Savior, a rescuer, a Messiah would come. And within their belief system, they already believed there would be one God, and one day there would be a rescuer to come. And guess what? That rescuer showed up. His name was Jesus. And so for the first followers they felt like, hey, this is for us. And that's why the early followers of Jesus were all Jewish. Now, if you wanted to also follow Jesus, you could do so. But the best thing to do for you to follow him appropriately was for you to also become a Jew. And there's more about this throughout the book of Acts. They had to wrestle with it and figure out what's going on. And this forms a big part of the early church's history. But it's important to understand the context. Peter is an eyewitness to the things that he had seen and heard. And also he's in a religious, cultural system which believed it was a Jewish thing for Jewish people. Another important thing to be aware of for the context is, for the Jewish people, there were very strict and specific rules about what was clean and what was unclean. Now, this was not a brand new rule. I mean, the other week we just got a brand new rule, didn't we? The rule of 6. And that relates to how we're allowed to meet with other groups of people here in the UK. But that's a brand new rule that we're having to adjust to. But these rules about what was clean and unclean is not a new rule. In fact, it's thousands of years old. In fact, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, everybody in living history that you know of has followed these rules. They're not brand new. Nobody's just thought of them recently. This is the way things have always been done. Literally. Forever. It's the way it is. There were very specific rules on that which was clean and on that which was unclean. So, back to the story. Peter goes with these servants to the house of Cornelius. And then Peter does that thing which, maybe you know somebody like this. Maybe you've got a friend in your life who just blurts things out and says stuff before they actually think it through. Peter was a bit like that. Listen to how he greets people at Cornelius' house. Hey everybody, I'm Peter. You know, and I know, it's against our laws for a Jewish person to associate and visit Gentile people. However, the Lord has shown me that I cannot call anything unclean that he has made clean. How about that as your opener? Well, that's what Peter does. See, Peter realized exactly what the vision was about. Peter was once again being challenged and provoked to do things differently. Last week we looked at how Peter was treating others like a commodity. Now he's being challenged to not treat others as if he were superior to them. You see, if you have a rule-based system that says if one person is less than, that therefore means someone else is greater than, so that means someone is better than another. If someone is unclean and clean, you create a system where you always have those who are wrong and those who are right, or even more right. And the more right you can appear to be, you sometimes get confused and think that the more self-righteous you are, that somehow the better you are. Well, I mean, it's a simple way to say it, but it's pretty sad, because that's not the heart of Jesus. In fact, Jesus brought in a whole new way of looking at things. a whole new way of treating others, a whole new way of behaving and responding and caring for others. For Peter, it was okay culturally for him to say, this person is less than me and I am greater than them. It was okay culturally because, that's what they've been doing for thousands of years. It was okay culturally for him to do that. But just because it was okay culturally, and just because it was the way things had been done, it didn't mean that was the way things should be done. Because Jesus is challenging him once again to treat others differently. I wonder if there are ways in our culture that give us permission to look down on others. Here's an example. How about economically? How easy is it for you to look down on someone else because they may have a lower financial status than you? Maybe you do it at the school gate. You see other families at the school gate and you just look down at them and you think, oh, they're scruffy, or I'm glad I don't dress like that, or I wouldn't want to associate with people like that. Maybe you find a reason to look down on someone. Peter's being challenged. That's not the heart of God. That's not the way we should be as followers of Jesus. It doesn't matter if you live in a mansion or live in a shed. It doesn't matter if you go to private school or state school. It doesn't matter if you eat lobster every week or have free school dinners and rely on food banks. It doesn't matter. None of those things should ever be in our lips and our hearts as followers of Jesus. Don't you dare call anyone unclean that I have made clean. Don't you dare look down on them. Don't you dare raise your children that way. If you've got children, as parents, we have a responsibility to impart and train them for the heart of God. Don't you dare keep something going just because it's okay culturally. Jesus challenges us. He challenges us to treat others different, to begin to think differently and behave differently. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And at this point, Peter had been following Jesus for 10 years? 10 years. And even though he'd been following Jesus for 10 years, he still is being challenged to change the way he does things. We live in a culture obsessed with self. In fact, popular culture tells you, look out for number one. Look out for yourself. If you're happy, it's okay. As long as it feels good, it's fine. There's a lot of rules in our culture which are not the way that we are supposed to behave or treat others. Whether we like to admit it or not, all of our hearts are predisposed to think of ourselves first. Jesus challenges us to always think of others. I wonder what Peter was thinking about. Maybe as Peter was leaving the one house and going over to Cornelius' house, it says it took a couple of days. I wonder what Peter was thinking about. I'm going to imagine here, but I'm just kind of imagining that the stuff that Peter thought about, I think he was remembering his times with Jesus. And maybe he thought about the time when Jesus himself was asked to go to a Roman centurion's house or to heal a Roman centurion's servant. Maybe he remembered the time when Jesus himself went into the room where a dead little girl lay Or maybe he's remembering the time when this woman, who by all means and by all standards and culture was written off as unclean because of the way she was bleeding, she was unclean, and yet she touched Jesus. Maybe he remembered the time that Jesus touched the leper who was unclean. Maybe he remembered the time that Jesus touched the coffin of the widow's son. Maybe he remembered the time when Jesus sat down and had a conversation with a woman at a well, a Samaritan, an outcast, an unclean woman. Maybe the time when Jesus' feet were washed by this woman of ill repute, where others would say, right off. Maybe Peter was remembering his own story, his own mistakes, his own failings, and the times when he would have said about himself, I have done nothing to be righteous, I am only a failure, and yet you do not say I am unclean. You call me clean, and you invite me. See, every one of those examples, Jesus broke the rules. Jesus broke the rules of religion and culture and tradition. He broke all of those rules. And he did so because he thought of others first. And he had a love that is to be extended to others. So how dare we look down on others? How dare we treat others like a commodity? How dare we think of self to the point where we disregard giving ourselves to others? How dare we? I'm sorry, it's a bit of a challenge. You know, if you're like me, you don't really like to be challenged. Let's be honest. You don't really like somebody sort of poking you and prodding you and to change the way that you do things. And in fact, you might be one of those Christians who think nobody in the church should challenge me anyway, or nobody should speak into my life. You know, there are people that think that way. Yet Jesus challenges us. And like Peter, who'd been following Jesus for 10 years at this point, Jesus is still challenging Peter to change the way he does things. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, I'm warning you, you will be challenged. The heart of God always is reaching out for the other. It always stretches us. The heart of God stretches us out of our comfort zones and into the mission field. You see, they might have thought the early church was cool, was going well. They might have thought, hey, this thing that we got happening here in Jerusalem, everything's going really well. But oh no, there is a huge event that's going to take place, and Peter is going to speak to Cornelius and a family of Gentiles, and something happens, and they all get saved. And not only do they get saved, the Holy Spirit falls on them, and they begin doing that thing which only the Jewish people had done before. When the Spirit fell on them, they spoke in languages that were new and unknown. All of a sudden, they're doing this as well. The same thing is happening to these Gentiles that happened to the first early followers of Jesus. And this event is the second major event in the history of the church, because it is this event which was controversial. It was this event which was a big challenge. It was this event which made the early church rethink the way it was doing everything. It was a big deal when Peter went into that house, and when God's Spirit fell and changed those people's lives. You might not be a follower of Jesus, but I invite you to discover the amazing, incredible love of God. I invite you. You could be a troublemaker. You could be troubled.
Your life could be all together, your life could be falling apart. You could be dirt poor and you could be filthy rich. I invite you. I invite you. Wherever you are welcome and invited to the table. And I want to apologize if you have ever felt like you are less than. And for some reason you felt like you had to prove your worth and climb up some sort of ladder to say that I am righteous enough. That's not the way of Jesus. When Jesus looks at us, he sees that none of us are able to climb and make ourselves righteous. And so he gives himself for us and says, I will make you clean. I will give my life for yours. That's the message of the gospel. And you're invited to participate. You're invited to discover and learn more. It's not forced on you. It's just an invitation. And it's up to you to follow it. It's up to you. And if you'd like to know more, please get in touch with us. You can contact us through the website or you can contact us via email. I'd love to walk and journey with you. We'd love to participate together. What we're going to do now, we're just going to close in a song, close in a time of worship. And this song reminds us of the love of God that goes the extra mile, that reaches, that challenges, that pushes us out of our comfort zones and into the mission field. Let's worship together now.
Before I took a breath
Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to get in touch. Also, remember to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay informed and stay in touch with everything that's going on. I look forward to the time that we can meet together in person. But until then, have a wonderful, great, and blessed day. Thank you.